Edmund Burke looms large in the history of political philosophy and the philosophy of political criticism, in part because of his divided legacy as to whether he should be understood as the first modern conservative or if he is the culmination and the high watermark of the moderate Whig tradition, which is also sometimes called classical liberalism. More importantly, he offered up one of the first systematic critiques of the French Revolution, which began the pamphlet wars in England, which divided the English intelligentsia between pro- and anti-revolution intellectuals. Rather than be engaged in the debates as to whether we should understand Burke as the first modern conservative or as the culmination and the high watermark of classical liberalism, we will examine three of Burke's principal ideas in his critique of the French Revolution. The Revolution's anti-institutionalism, anti-humanism, and anti-property sentiment and ideology. The beginning of Burke's critique of the French Revolution begins with his analysis of a revolution society and the contrast he draws with a constitutional society. Those are both phrases that Burke uses to begin his criticism of the French Revolution as a revolution society in contrast and contradistinction to constitutional society. And of course, what Burke has in mind with a constitutional society is England. Burke's constitutional society is a well-ordered society from organic evolution with ancient and long-standing roots, but also more modern realities, because as that constitutional society evolves and moves through time, changes, progress, new bureaucracies, new laws, new customs are grafted onto this ever-progressing and ever-evolving reality of constitutional society. So a constitutional society can be understood as the particularized manifestation of certain universal truths, like the right to self-associate, the right to organize government, the right to dismiss corrupt rulers, etc. And as these truths, as these political rights move through time and evolve through time, they impact our understanding of law, of regulation, and what it means to have a constitutional society and government. A constitutional society, according to Burke, is a society of laws and what he calls regulated liberty. For without laws and proper regulations, no society can be orderly, effective in its composition and conduct, and have the legal means of juridical precedence to maintain itself, while also allowing the means of dismissal, improvement, and ingenuity within society. One of Burke's key arguments in favor of organic institutionalism or organic constitutionalism is how institutions have a transcendent character to them. That is, it is larger than just the mere self. Although institutions and laws will often try to protect the rights of the self, the goal of institution has a much larger societal aim. Organic institutions are the institutions of inheritance, and they are the institutions of progress. It is what our ancestors worked and bequeathed to us, and so we honor our ancestors in accepting this inheritance, yet we are also progressing that inheritance forward in time, planning to pass them on to the future, to our children, to a reality that is not yet in existence. In this manner, the chain of history is tied together, past, present, and future. Past, present, and future are all linked together in the constitutional compact between dead, living, and to be born. As Burke explains and writes himself, this policy appears to me to be the result of profound reflection, or rather the happy effect of following nature, which is wisdom without reflection and above reflection. A spirit of innovation is generally the result of a selfish temperament and limited views. People who never look back at their ancestors will not look forward to their posterity. Besides, the people of England know well that the idea of inheritance provides a sure principle of conservation and a sure principle of transmission, without at all excluding a principle of improvement. Whatever advantages are obtained by a state proceeding on the maxims are locked fast as in a sort of family settlement, held tight forever. By a constitutional policy that follows the pattern of nature, we receive, hold, and transmit our government and our privileges in the same way as we enjoy and transmit our property and our lives. As Burke so importantly reflects in this section, a society that looks upon its ancestors with scorn or doesn't look upon its ancestors at all doesn't concern itself with the future either. When you are only present focused, when you are selfish and self-centered, you have cut yourself off from time itself, the historical past, and the time progressing into the future. A constitutional society, by contrast, is something that looks upon the past, looks upon ancestors, utilizes that wisdom to improve the present so as to pass it on into the future. It recognizes the goods of the past, the goods of the present, and evolves those goods into the future. It is good because it has established and worked to improve the legal traditions, rights, and liberties and traditions of any society that we can see by reflecting upon the past, by inheriting it in the present, and wanting to pass that on into the future. For Burke, a constitutional society is a society that advocates true progress because it recognizes the goods of the past, the goods of the present, and seeks to improve them for the goods of the future. Burke argues that France had its opportunity to transform itself, to see the wisdom of the past, to progress that wisdom in the present so as to pass it on into the future. In its inability, in French society's missing this opportunity, they developed a revolution society, which is the opposite of an organic and constitutional society. For Burke, the impetus of revolution is always to destroy, whereas the goal of an organic or constitutional society is to grow and improve. As Burke highlights, the revolution overturned laws, ancient customs and traditions, ancient institutions. It attempted to create anew from a blank slate, a new man and a new society, premised on mechanical laws and the belief that humans, being machines operating under the mechanical laws of nature, could be forced into a new material perfection. The Revolution Society has had the unintended consequences, of course, of poverty, death, and anarchy, not to mention the countless tens of thousands killed in the dream of the revolution's utopian fantasy. Was all of this necessary, Burke asks us, as the defenders of revolution always end up proclaiming that the ends justify the means? Burke soundly answers no. Burke rejects the utilitarian and minimally amoral if otherwise immoral, impetus of revolutionary thinking. The bloodshed, Burke argues, was not necessary. Moreover, Burke argues that the revolution society and its perpetrators make conscious choice of evil. This unforced choice, he writes, this foolish choice of evil would seem perfectly inexplicable if we didn't consider the composition of the National Assembly. What Burke says here is very important for us to understand. He associates revolutionary politics with the foolish choice of evil. There is good and evil, and revolution tends to always choose evil. Why is the revolutionary society evil and chooses evil? Because Burke agrees with the ancient understanding of evil as inherited by Christianity. Evil is the privation, the elimination of the good, the true, and the beautiful, which results from a lack of proper reasoning or understanding of the world. In choosing destruction and murder, the revolution society consciously chooses the destruction, the elimination, the privation of all the good and beautiful things in this world, with the deluded belief that utopia is just over the horizon. The result of the revolution society is the complete and utter destruction of institutions, ancient juridical systems, customs, and traditions, and the overturning of constitutional and organic society. It is no longer concerned with the practical reform in the present of the ancient inheritance of the past, but the wholesale elimination of all law, all order, and all institutions in the present to create a new society now. We can see Burke providing here a dialectical contrast between the two different societal types he outlines. The revolution society chooses destruction, and in that destruction, forced creation. It overturns laws and institutions and attempts to forcibly recreate society after this destruction is completed, because human nature demands that we must be governed by laws and institutions. For Burke, the driving impetus of the revolution society is, therefore, the spirit of destruction. It is the spirit of privation, which is the spirit of evil according to Christianity. The constitutional society, by contrast, chooses improvement, inheritance, and growth, sometimes slow and laborious as it is. The constitutional society understands its shortcomings and imperfections and tries to build upon and improve where it has those shortcomings. The constitutional society is therefore reflective. It is rational. It recognizes its shortcomings and tries to build and improve upon those shortcomings. The constitutional society, additionally, has built-in mechanisms to dismiss, for instance, corrupt rulers and justices of the peace, ensuring a certain power of the people, like the Magna Carta in England's specific example, while not being reduced to anarchy and destruction as what happens in revolution. Something that all political philosophers know is that from Burke, organic conservatism changes all the time because it is about organic growth. This spirit of recognizing shortcoming and then working to improve upon it in the present so as to pass on something better into the future. And this is why many conservatives argue that Burke is, in fact, a conservative. Conservatism grows from seeds and roots and builds from the existing structures that emerge from these roots. Conservatism, as Burke himself implicitly says in his own rhetoric, right, that spirit, that constitutional spirit of conservation changes all the time. So conservation and conservatism, as Burke implicitly implicates in his writing is not about simply defending the status quo. It is actually about recognizing problems and changing those problems for the better. And here, the difference between constitution and revolution society is that in a constitution society, change, reform, progress accrues through time, through organic growth and development. In a revolution society, change is consummated and brought forth through terror, the tearing down of existing systems, abolishing the roots and seeds of a society, and attempting to create a new, as if from nothing, the new utopian society from scratch. So in understanding Burke's dichotomy and his dialectic between constitution society and revolution society, we should understand that a constitutional society is about organic change and development in and through time. It is the politics of societal evolution and adaptation. Revolution society is about social engineering. It is about creating anew from the fire of destruction that revolution itself brought forth. This is Burke's understanding of what it means to be living in either a constitutional or a revolutionary society. Furthermore, Burke articulates the notion that the revolution had an anti-human bent to it. Humanism is not the term that most people use today to mean free of God, free of religion, humans are amazing, we control our own destiny. Humanism, in the philosophical tradition that Burke himself was educated in, is the philosophy of human nature. It is a recognition of the essential reality of what it means to be a human and why humans are distinct from the rest of nature. So humanism argues two things. One, it recognizes that there is a human nature, a human reality to which we are governed, and it recognizes that humans are also distinct, different from the rest of nature. Already, Burke has shown signs of his humanism in the praise of constitutional society and his critique of revolution society. According to Burke, in order for humans to flourish, they must flourish best when they live in accord with nature. If you remember back to that statement, that paragraph we read of Burke that laid out the realities of a constitutional policy, a constitutional society, he said, by a constitutional policy that follows the pattern of nature. So note again, by a constitutional policy that follows the pattern of nature, we eventually arrive and live the good human life. So Burke associates the good life with a life in accord with the laws of nature, because humans have a nature that we are meant to actualize and live by. For Burke, humans therefore flourish best when they are part of the little platoons of a society. Burke's phrase of the little platoons has been one of his most famous and lasting phrases in the Reflections of the Revolution on France, and has become a sort of battle cry for many conservatives ever since. We see in Burke's phraseology and commentary over the little platoons that he understands human nature as being something communitarian, something social in nature. The individual places himself into a platoon for his own well-being and contributes to the development of that little platoon through his helping hand and his actions bringing about his fulfillment in that association. The first little platoon, that first germ of society from which all other mediations within society stem, is, according to Burke, the family. He follows a very long, simple philosophical tradition, going back to Aristotle and developed through the scholastic tradition that recognizes the family as the building block of all society. In the context of the Reflections, Burke is first talking about filial nobility, but filial nobility is also of blood relation. To love family is the first aspect of the good human life and the good society. Family is the first communitarian and social bond humans experience and associate with. Without the family, there can be no extension to now the country and also mankind. For family is where our first love of human reality and the human heart and the human passions and the human emotions grows and is experienced. And the expansion of that reality, that love we develop in the family, then extends to our town, to our township, to our cities, and to our country and countrymen. Revolution society, in contrast to the little platoons, forcibly places the individual into a homogeneous social contract. The individual serves the military. The individual serves the state. The individual serves the revolution. Burke points out that in revolutionary society, the individual doesn't actually have free choice and free love. The individual must be subjugated to some greater homogeneous construct, whether it's the military, whether it's the revolution idea, whether it's the revolutionary state. It is, therefore, the freedom of the individual found within the social fabric of love, where the individual can most fully be himself. It is in the little platoon that we learn the first principles of love and sacrifice, from which all future development in society come from. As Burke writes, it is the first link in the chain by which we move toward a love to our country and to mankind. Note again that important phrase, that important statement and sentence from Burke. It is by the love of our family that we, quote, move toward a love to our country and to mankind, end quote. The absence of the little platoons of society therefore prevent growth and love to inculcate itself into individuals, and therefore it becomes impossible to love our country and indeed to love mankind if we do not first develop the love of our family, the love that we experience in family. Burke is saying here that in a revolutionary society, precisely because it seeks the destruction of the family, revolutionary society is anti-humanistic at its core. It destroys the first principle upon which civilization is built. It destroys the very reality of love, the love that is required to move us to a love of country and then to a love of mankind. Revolutionary society destroys the very spirit and heart of love. And here it is important that we also understand that Burke's defense of the little platoons, that Burke's defense of the family, that Burke's humanism is not rooted in abstract rationalism. It is rooted in the passions, in the emotions, in the human heart. In fact, those critics of Burke during the pamphlet wars actually accused him of being a philosopher of the passions, of the heart, instead of rationality. And this is true. Burke is making the argument of love here in his defense of humanism. Humanism is predicated on love and not rationalist, whimsical thinking. And of course, there is a certain irony from Burke's perspective, because he says that love generates the ability to be reflective, to look back upon the past, to see the good things that our ancestors have given us in order to improve our society, our world, our custom, and our laws for our children. Burke actually thinks that rationality comes from love. Human emotion and human passions, the human heart, is what allows us to develop a proper rationality. It is the revolutionaries who, in destroying the family, in destroying the ability to love, who therefore cut themselves off from proper, ordered rationality. When the revolutionaries and the rationalists speak of reason, they are actually speaking of irrationality, because they have completely cut themselves off from the reality of human nature, which is love. The last major critique of the French Revolution is Burke's understanding that it was anti-property in its politics, in its sentiment, in its attitude. Burke was a strong defender of private property because property ownership allows for attachment, rootedness, growth, and inheritance, something that is tied to his defense of the little platoons, the love that is at the heart of the humanistic spirit, and the realities of an organic constitutional society. People need to be attached to things. People need more attachment, not less. And the best means of attachment to anything for Burke is property. It gives something to people to work for, to build from, to preserve, and to pass on. Again, property has this sort of mystical spirit in Burke's Reflections, where it ties us to the past, the present, and the future. It allows us to be tied to our family, the property upon which our family lives. It allows us to be tied to our neighbors, the town, the property in which the town that we live in exists. And it also allows us to be tied to our countrymen, for our country is also a property that we have common claim to. The attack on property that the revolutionaries embarked upon, Burke suggests, is the perversion that causes the destruction of all natural order in society. Because again, it is from property and the human heart, the love that is fostered upon the property to our family, which then extends to our countrymen, and then frankly to all mankind. Once you eliminate that reality from human life, then we fall into disorder, chaos, revolution, death, and destruction. So the attack on property really is a perversion of the natural order of reality. That is to say, Burke is also arguing that property ownership is completely natural. It is something that we ought to endorse as what is that spirit which allows love to develop, the very love that was absent in the revolutionaries. People attach themselves to property to seek to preserve that property because of the love they have for that property. And so, according to Burke, all society is not simply based upon family and the love of family, it is also based on property. For property allows the family to grow and develop. It allows us to have attachment, work, development, and growth. To take away or to seize property is not only a display of force, it is also something that leads to impoverishment. As Burke said earlier, part of the unintended consequence of the revolution was the impoverishment of the people of France. This is related to the seizure of property and replacing people who know how to work and develop that property with people who do not. A farmer knows how to till and develop the land. A mathematician who thinks he knows how to make the perfect farm, the perfect common, does not. And when you take away the people who have loved that land, who have lived on that land for generations, replacing them with people who have no attachment to that land, who have no ability to understand and have no practical knowledge as to what is best to cultivate, develop, and till that land, disaster, impoverishment is what happens. Now, to be sure, Burke's defense of property is also a defense of aristocratic nobility. Yet, Burke also criticizes the nobility for its actions in France. The nobility had shortcomings. The nobility in France is not free. It is not free of guilt. They are partially responsible for not having realized the problems that France was in that would have allowed them to reform along the lines of a constitutional society. So those who critique Burke as simply a defender of aristocratic privilege miss the fact that he routinely and regularly critiques the French nobility as having a direct hand in the impoverishment of France, in the fire of revolution that was born from their gross negligence. But that does not mean that those realities of property, the reality of the family, the customs, the institutions, and the laws that had developed in France should have been destroyed. The replacement of old aristocrats results in new aristocrats, as Burke was seeing in the composition of the National Assembly, in the revolutionary leaders who took the place of those aristocrats and those nobles that they overthrew. And what was the result of that overthrowing of the old aristocrats? Even greater death, destruction, and negligence. Taking away property simply leads to the impoverishment of a society. The most enduring contribution to political philosophy from Burke was his initial commentary over the difference between a revolution society and a constitutional society. For Burke, the constitutional society is the ongoing and constantly evolving relationship of a society with its history, identity, and tradition. It is the union of past, present, and future. The constitutional society is the society of laws, rules, and regulations that exist for the development and flourishing of a society. The constitutional society is about growth, development, and adaptation. It is about inheritance and improvement. Revolution society is the opposite of the constitutional society. The revolution society chooses destruction first in the false hope that after wiping the slate clean, a new beginning can commence. For Burke, only further destruction and anarchy can come from this belief in revolution. The revolution society destroys laws, constitutions, norms, customs, and traditions, and attempts to forcibly create anew. It forcibly attempts to create anew all the laws, constitutions, norms, and customs that would reflect the ideal society dreamt up in the imagination of whimsical thinkers. Does it actually sound good or make sense? Perhaps, but that doesn't mean it has any basis in reality. Anything can sound good in abstract theory, but if it is premised on a false metaphysic, a false nature, it will always fail because it runs contrary to nature. Burke's analysis and criticism of the French Revolution sparked the pamphlet wars in England, dividing British intellectuals into pro- and anti-revolution camps. Burke situated himself firmly in the anti-revolution camp. He ended up looking the best of all those who were involved in the criticism or the promotion of the French Revolution when the revolution turned to terror and the revolutionary wars subsequently engulfed Europe, which justified his writings according to his defenders. What was the outcome of this continued devolution into revolution? It was mass death, destruction, and slaughter. The very death, destruction, and slaughter that Burke said was going to happen once you go down the path of a revolutionary society. If there is anything we should take away from Burke's reflections on the revolution in France, it is that dichotomy, that dialectic between a constitutional and revolutionary society. So again, the constitutional society is the society of laws, rules, and regulations that exist for the development and the flourishing of society based upon the love of family and the love of property, which leads to the love of country. A revolutionary society, by contrast, chooses destruction first, in its false hope that after wiping the slate clean, a new beginning can commence, a new society can be created. The revolutionary society, therefore, according to Burke, must destroy all laws, constitutions, norms, customs, and traditions, and then attempt to forcibly create anew all laws, constitutions, norms, and customs that would reflect the ideal society rationally dreamt up by of the revolutionaries. But because revolution society is premised on a false metaphysic, the absence of love of family and property, it will always result in death and destruction.